Please be seated. Welcome back, members of the jury. I hope you had a good weekend. And we're going to get started again here. The state may call its next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. The state calls Dr. Lauren Jackson.
Doctor, will you please come forward? And then stand behind the witness chair just next to me. And raise your right hand. Do you swear under penalty of perjury that you will truthfully respond to questions pertaining to this case?
I do.
Please have a seat. And then state your full name and spell it.
My name is Lauren, L-O-R-R-E-N.
Oh, please remove your mask. I'm sorry.
First name Lauren, L-O-R-R-E-N. Wilson, W-I-L-S-O-N. Jackson, J-A-C-K-S-O-N.
All right, doctor, things to keep in mind when you're testifying. The court reporter is taking down everything that's being said. So you have to answer with a yes or a no instead of shaking your head. Please no uh-huh or uh-uhs. We can't be talking over each other, so wait until the question's finished before you answer. If an objection is made, stop talking immediately and don't answer the question unless I tell you to, okay? If you don't understand a question, let the lawyer know. All right. Okay, counsel.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Dr. Jackson.
Good morning.
Where do you work, sir?
I work at the Hennepin County Medical Examiner's Office.
And what's your job title there?
I'm an assistant medical examiner there.
How long have you been an assistant medical examiner?
I've been an assistant medical examiner for 12 years.
And are you a licensed physician?
I am.
And do you have a particular specialty that's associated with the work that you do?
I do. I have a specialty in forensic pathology.
What's your educational background?
Beginning in medical school, I graduated from the University of Arizona College of Medicine in 2002. That included a year as a post-sophomore research fellow in pathology. I then proceeded to the University of California at San Francisco, where I completed a pathology residency there that included a surgical pathology fellowship and a year as a clinical instructor at San Francisco General Hospital. Upon that completion in 2008, I went to the University of New Mexico in the Office of the Medical Examiner in Albuquerque and completed a year as a forensic pathology fellow. And upon completion of that in 2009, I came to Minnesota and I've practiced here ever since.
Do you have any board certifications?
I do.
And describe those for the jury, please.
Yes, I am board certified in anatomic pathology and forensic pathology.
And are you up to date with all of the requirements for being board certified?
I am.
Getting back to your role as an assistant Hennepin County medical examiner, could you describe for the jury what your job duties are?
My job duties revolve around establishing cause and manner of death and medical legal death investigation, particularly in cases of unnatural, unexpected, or violent deaths.
And does that include some investigation as well as some physical exams?
Yes, it includes quite a number of things. Investigation, autopsies. We do a bunch of outreach activities in terms of education, but again, primarily it revolves around identification of remains and establishing cause and manner of death.
And is the purpose of an autopsy to establish cause and manner of death?
That's one of the major goals, yes.
Could you describe for the jury the method and procedure that you follow generally when it comes to the autopsy process?
The autopsy itself or the whole approach?
The approach.
So the approach starts with information gathering. We have medical investigators that work for us that collect information pertaining to an individual's medical history, events that may have unfolded that pertain or might impact the cause and manner of death, the interpretation of that. Meaning we'll get reports from first responders or from law enforcement agents or from next of kin or other witnesses. We'll collect that information as we proceed. Once we get that information, or as we collect that information, we'll proceed on to the autopsy portion, which is an examination that is external and then internal. And I can detail those if that's what you're asking for.
Sure. You mentioned that there's an autopsy process that involves an external and an internal exam. Is there also toxicological components of that as well?
Yes. So the external portion of our examination includes viewing the body in an as-is state, noting any kind of clothing or medical interventions that might be present on the body, collecting hair and fingernails depending on the type of case, and also performing x-rays depending on the type of case, potentially to look for injuries or retained projectiles that might be present. Once we complete that portion of the as-is examination, we will remove the medical interventions, survey the body again looking for injury or natural disease, take photographs as we go to document any findings. Once we complete that portion, we will clean the body, repeat the examination, again scrutinizing for any forms of injury whatsoever or a natural disease, things that might help us determine cause and manner of death. And that is the external portion of the exam. Upon completion of that, we'll proceed to the internal portion of the exam, which is more what people think of when they think of autopsies. So we will examine the tissues of the body from head to toe internally. We'll go organ by organ, looking for injury, evidence of disease, or other findings. We will collect tissues for microscopic work. We'll collect tissues for potential toxicology studies. Sometimes we will perform, depending on the case, specialty examinations, looking at dissecting the wrists or the back or the neck, looking for injuries that might be hard to see externally.
And you indicated that you documented this process with photographs as you go?
Yes, all the way through the process.
And then do you ultimately draft a report as well?
That is our goal.
And are there certain types of cases within your office that go through a secondary review process with another pathologist?
Yes, all children under 6 and all homicides are reviewed by a second pathologist.
And throughout the course of your career, approximately how many autopsies have you conducted?
I've conducted myself over 1,800 autopsies, and I've assisted or trained other individuals on hundreds more.
Dr. Jackson, I'm going to direct your attention to April 11th of this year. Did you respond to a scene with respect to a death investigation on that date?
I did.
And how did you come to be involved in that case?
So yes, that was a weekend. It was a Sunday, and I was en route to home after work, and I was a doctor on call, and it happened that sometime after about 5 o'clock, I received a call from one of our investigators that there had been an officer-involved shooting in one of our areas that we cover. An officer-involved shooting is the type of case where a doctor does respond with the medical investigator. So we arranged a meeting point and carpooled to the scene. And when we got there, we met up with one of the investigators from the BCA who had jurisdiction in the case.
So where approximately did you respond?
The site was in Brooklyn Center. It was on 63rd Avenue North, I believe, at the corner of Catherine Drive.
And you indicated that you responded with someone else from your office. Who was that?
That was Stephanie Erickson, one of our investigators.
And approximately what time of day was it when you arrived on scene?
So we got the call after 5. The placard, which we fill out when we arrive at the site of the body, was the time on that was 6:11 p.m. I believe.
And you indicated that photos are typically taken by your office. Does that include also photos of your arrival on scene and observations on scene?
Yes, part of our field examination includes photography of the scenes of the body and things around the body.
In addition to the photographs during the autopsy process?
Correct, and separate from.
Your Honor, at this time, the state would offer exhibits 99, 102, 103, 105, 107, 108, 110, 114, 116, 118, 119 through 125, 127, 141, 143, 145, 146 for demonstrative purposes, 147 through 149, 152, 155, 157, 158, and 160.
Is there any objection to those exhibits?
Objections were noted.
Yes, okay. And I ruled on those objections. Those exhibits will be admitted.
Thank you, Your Honor.
I'm going to read the instruction on demonstrative evidence. The state is about to introduce a computer-generated animation. This does not serve as proof of any facts in itself. It is presented only to aid your understanding of a witness's testimony or other evidence here in court. If the animation is not consistent with your evaluation of the testimony or other evidence, you should disregard the animation and determine the facts from the underlying testimony or other evidence.
Thank you, Your Honor. And just to be clear for the record, all of the exhibits are offered substantively with the exception of 146, which is offered for demonstrative purposes. At this time, I would ask that we put Exhibit 99 on screen, please. All right, Dr. Jackson, do you see a photograph in front of you?
I do.
And looking at that photograph, could you describe what you observed when you arrived on scene on April 11th?
Yes, we came in from the west. This is a view looking east, and what we see here as we approach the scene were two damaged vehicles, some debris in the middle of the roadway, a number of squad cars. Off in the distance there are police tape markers there. We did notice media present and a large crowd gathered beyond the barrier.
And then if we could put Exhibit 102 on the screen, please. You described observing vehicles. Was there also a tent location that was set up behind one of those vehicles?
Yes, adjacent to this white vehicle, which was reportedly the decedent's vehicle, is a greenish colored tent that was erected over the body for privacy purposes.
And did you ultimately enter the tent?
We did.
And what information did you have at that time when you arrived on scene and went into the tent to look at the body?
We were briefed by a special agent from the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension and got a little bit more information, namely that a short distance down the road from here, the decedent had been pulled over at a traffic stop and was injured, shot, and managed to drive his vehicle a short distance, and it crashed here at this point where you see it. The individual was unresponsive in the car, removed from the car by law enforcement, if I recall, and pulled a short distance to the grassy yard where the tent was erected over him sometime later.
And did you learn the identity of the individual who had passed away?
We had a tentative identity of Daunte Wright.
And was that identity later confirmed?
It was later by fingerprints.
If we could put Exhibit 103 on the screen, please. You indicated that you entered the tent. What was the condition of Daunte Wright's body at that time?
This is the view we saw, less the placard that we put on the body, but the body was lying in the grass, covered by a sheet as depicted here. We could see some clothing emerging from the sheet. There were some medical interventions and other wrappers on the ground.
If we could put Exhibit 105 on the screen, please. Could you describe what you did after observing the body with the sheet?
Yes, after this the field examination portion of our work, and we removed the sheet, exposed the body as you see it here. Again, looking at different medical interventions that are present, the clothing that is somewhat disturbed, likely due to medical intervention, the process of medical intervention there. And we've placed our placard with pertinent information known at the time over the body for this identification photo.
And then you indicated that the placard had a time. Is that the 1811 that's noted there?
Yes,
And would that be 6:11 p.m.?
correct.
And the ME staff noted there as Erickson. Is that Stephanie Erickson from your office?
That is correct.
Could we put Exhibit 107 on the screen, please? Did you make some closer observations of the body on the scene?
Yes, we did. We've taken a number of photos. This particular photo is a close-up of the left side of the decedent's body. And what's depicted here are a number of medical interventions. The one centered in the photo is a clear adhesive patch and occlusive dressing that's placed over a gunshot wound. There's some dark discoloration that you can see there in this image, and that is dried blood, essentially.
And after observing the body on scene, what did you do next? If we could put up Exhibit 108 so you could describe.
So after we complete our field examination, which entails, again, looking at the body and the items surrounding it and on it, we'll gently roll the body and examine the back, again, searching for potential injury. Once we have completed our field exam, we will bag the hands, which means putting paper bags over the hands to potentially preserve any trace evidence that might be there. Then we'll carefully put the body in a body pouch and seal it with a zip-locking tag, which is pictured here. This is the yellow tag going through the zipper pulls, and that's labeled with the decedent's medical, or the decedent's ME number, which we've established, the date and time of the bag seal, and initialed by the witnesses.
And when you describe the date and time of this seal and initialed by the witnesses, is this here that seal that you're describing?
Yes, it is.
And it indicates 4/11/21/1835. Would that be 6:35 p.m.?
Yes.
And what does that time indicate?
That is the time that I filled out that bag tag and sealed it on the pouch.
So would that have been the approximate time you had bagged the body?
Yes, directly. It would be 1 minute before that we put the body in the bag.
And then the initials noted there, whose initials are those?
Those are Stephanie Erickson, the investigator, and LJ, my initials.
And after you sealed up the body, what was done with the body?
So in the field, this is a picture of the bag as we saw it the following morning, but after we seal the bag in the field, the body is transported to our office, and we have a transport company that actually effected this move, and they arrived shortly after we did at the scene.
And was it the next day, on April 12th, when you began the autopsy process?
Yes.
Did you start with x-rays on the morning of April 12th?
Yes, in cases of gunshot wounds, we identify potential sites of injury and get x-rays of those so we can identify potential locations of bullets to make recovery easier the following day. So that did occur the morning of the 12th.
And if we could put Exhibit 110 on the screen, please. Could you describe for the jury what's shown here?
Yes, these are side-by-side images of Daunte Wright's chest, and you can see there's a number of things going on here. On the left-hand image, which is an anterior, posterior, or front-facing view, you can see a number of wires of medical interventions. On the decedent's right side, which is the left side in this view, we're looking at the images. If we're looking at the patient, you can see a bright white object, and that is a retained projectile.
And if you could use, there's either a stylus like this or your finger to circle the item that you're describing on that image, please.
Yes, there I've circled the retained projectile.
And then after taking these x-rays, did you, slightly later in the morning, start the full autopsy exam process?
Yes.
And did that include, as you described earlier, examining the body as it was before cleaning and doing additional further examination?
Yes, that's standard procedure.
Could we put Exhibit 114 on the screen, please? Could you describe what's shown here, please, in Exhibit 114?
Yes, we take pictures of the body as is. So this is after I have broken the seal on the body bag, and without disturbing the body or any of the contents, we take the as-is photograph. So this is a view of the lower half of the decedent's body. You can see jeans there. There's a single shoe on the left foot, a sock on the right.
And the condition of the clothing and body as it is depicted here, was that as it was on scene when you had observed the body the day before?
Yes.
Could we put Exhibit 116 on the screen, please? What's shown here?
So this is a photograph that is one image more superior or towards the head relative to the picture we just saw. I've placed a privacy towel over the decedent's privates, and what we're seeing here again is a view of the body similar to that as we saw in the field. You can see medical interventions, clothing as we saw it in the field, and particularly medical interventions overlying gunshot wounds of the chest here.
So at this point, all of those medical interventions are still attached to the body, is that right?
Yes, this is the very as-is photograph, so we haven't manipulated those interventions in any way.
If we could put Exhibit 118 on the screen, please. Did you do some further examination of those seals that you had described and sort of continue to look in those areas?
Yeah, so as I alluded to earlier, we take photographs and document what we see initially, and then we remove in a stepwise fashion the various clothing articles and interventions. What we're looking at here is the injury on the lower left side of the chest, and I've peeled away the occlusive dressing that was placed in the field.
And could you please, for the jury, just describe the difference between an entrance wound and an exit wound?
In general?
In general, and then as applied to the images that we see.
Yes. In general, entrance gunshot wounds have a circular or oval appearance. There's usually some missing tissue in the center of the wound. There can be abrasions around the edge of the wound. This particular image that we're looking at here does show a wound that has those features. We will see a cleaned up version of this in subsequent images.
And when you say those features, is what you observe here consistent with an entrance wound?
They are, yes.
And then if we could put Exhibit 119 on the screen, please. Could you describe what's shown here, please?
So this is the picture of the right side of the chest, again with the occlusive dressing peeled back, showing an area of injury. It's difficult to see here due to the presence of blood, but this is the opposite injury.
And when you say opposite injury, would you characterize that as, how would you characterize that?
Yes, we will see that the injury on the left side of the chest is an entrance wound, and then this will be shown to show features of an exit gunshot wound. It happened when we peeled back this dressing that you could actually palpate or feel the bullet directly below the skin adjacent to this wound. So that was a definite clue that this was the exit side.
And then after removing the medical interventions, removing the seals, documenting that process as you went along, did you ultimately clean the body and then continue to do further investigation or examination?
Yes.
If we could put Exhibit 120 on the screen, please. Could you describe what's shown here, please?
So this is a view of Mr. Wright's chest from the front, and pictured here are the entrance and exit wounds. May I mark?
Yes, you may.
These areas. So again, on the left side here and on the right side here are the gunshot wounds in question that we've looked at initially.
And what, if anything, is significant to you about the positioning of these two injuries?
Other than the fact that they are on the front side of the chest, the anterior side of the chest, and there's a little swelling around these wounds beneath the skin, suggestive of hemorrhage. Those are the major findings.
And I'll ask you some more about this as we go on to your internal examination, but looking at the body externally, did this give you any indication with respect to trajectory or a bullet path?
Yes, again, given the fact that there was a bullet present on the right side of the decedent's body and an entrance defect on the left side, it suggested a rightward progression of the bullet through the body.
And if you could just indicate with your finger the direction of travel that you're describing.
Yes, so a bullet entering approximately near this red dot, but below it would have traveled in this general direction here, as I've indicated.
And then if we could put exhibits 121 and 122 on the screen next to each other. If Your Honor, if you could clear the screen, please. Thank you. Could you please describe for the jury what's shown in exhibits 121 and 122?
Yes, so this is a left side view of the body in the left-hand photograph. We've looked at this from the front, and with the occlusive dressing peeled partly off. What we're seeing here is the clean version. On the right-hand side is a zoomed-in image of the wound on that left side of the body.
And as part of your autopsy process, when it comes to gunshot wounds, do you typically look for things like soot or stippling on the body?
Absolutely. In addition to trying to assess what an entrance or an exit wound might be, we try to assess for clues as to range of fire. And sometimes these are present, sometimes they are not. When we have, for instance, evidence of a muzzle abrasion, so markings on the skin suggestive of contact with a gun, then we know it's a contact range of fire. If we find evidence of soot or gunpowder deposition or gunpowder stippling, which is a punctate or dot-like abrasions on the skin that occur based on the impact of gunpowder, we can say that it was a intermediate range of fire, so between contact and 2 or 3 feet at most. In this case, we found none of those identifiers, not on the skin and not on the clothing, so we settled on indeterminate range of fire, given the lack of specific evidence.
And just to clarify, when you say you saw none of those, you did not see soot or stippling, is that correct?
Correct.
And when you say indeterminate, maybe you could just describe to the jury, what does it mean to have an indeterminate range of fire?
So indeterminate range of fire simply means that we don't have specific clues as to a definite range of fire, so it leaves it open to the possibility of interpretation.
If we could put exhibits 123 and 124 on the screen, please, next to each other. Dr. Jackson, exhibits 123 and 124 are on the screen. Could you please describe what's shown here?
Yes, the image on the left shows a gunshot-related defect, on the right side of the body, and the image on the right is a close-up photograph of that same injury.
And how would you describe this? I know you had initially used the term maybe partial exit wound. Do you have another way of describing this injury as well?
Yes, let me just explain what a partial exit wound is. If the bullet goes in and out of the body, you have a classic exit wound. And in this instance, because the bullet made a defect, made a hole in the skin, but did not leave the body, we call this a partial exit. And this occurs when there's not enough velocity for the bullet to escape the body. We see this on occasion. Other features of this injury that we see are areas of red-brown abrasion and that are present on the edges of the wound. And this is something that is consistent with what we call a shored exit. And this can occur when the skin is pinched between the bullet, which is pushing outward on the skin, and rubbing against some other object. In this case, it's likely the clothing, the decedent's clothing, such that the skin gets pinched there and a rub spot occurs or an abrasion is formed.
Now, Dr. Jackson, before we get to your internal exam, I'd like to ask about the rest of the body. Did you also examine the rest of the body for injury?
Yes.
And if we could put exhibit 125 on the screen, please. Could you describe what's shown in Exhibit 125, please?
Yes, this exhibit shows a close-up of the decedent's face and neck area. And on this image, which is a cleaned image, we can see areas of abrasion on the right nostril region and what is a laceration with some abrasion below the right lip.
And if we could put Exhibit 127 on the screen, please. Could you describe what's shown here?
Yes, this is a picture of the decedent's lower lip, and on that right aspect of the lower lip, you can see a laceration. It's actually communicated with the abraded-looking lesion on the prior image.
And how would you characterize these injuries to the face that you saw in Exhibits 125 and 127 on the lip and the nose?
I would call these superficial blunt force injuries.
And when you say superficial, what does that mean?
I would say that these injuries are non-life threatening, particularly in with respect to comparison with the gunshot wound.
Are they consistent with the circumstances that you were aware of surrounding the time of death, including a potential vehicle collision?
Yes.
Were these injuries significant in any way with respect to your finding of cause and manner of death?
No, the blunt force injuries that we identified on the body did not contribute to the cause of death.
And did you also examine the rest of the body for other injuries as well?
Yes.
Did you find some other superficial injuries?
Yes, there were other superficial abrasions and some bruises or contusions.
Bruises and contusions, were those on things like the arms and legs?
Yes.
Could you just provide sort of a general overview of the types of things that you saw?
Yes, so small abrasions were found on the arm and forearm on the left side. For instance, these appeared much like rug burns in terms of their degree of depth, so again, superficial injuries. There were some minor abrasions on the right and left sides of the back, very much like simple scratches. And there were some contusions or bruises on the lower extremities as well, around the knees and the thigh on the left side.
Were any of those injuries that you observed that you described as superficial, were any of them significant with respect to your findings of cause and manner of death in this case?
No.
Would they all be consistent with the circumstances surrounding death, including a vehicle collision?
Certainly the collision or the process of extrication and resuscitation.
And when you discuss extrication, did you also observe some dirt or grass on the body as well before it was cleaned?
Yes, there were a few streaks, linear marks, as if someone had been pulled across dirt, yes.
And again, were those consistent with what you understood to be the circumstances surrounding the collision and the extrication from the car?
Yes.
All right, getting back to, what was the most significant injury with respect to your exam?
Far and away, the gunshot wound to the chest was the most significant injury.
Now, getting back to that gunshot wound, you told the jury a little bit about your external exam and your observations there. Was the trajectory in that bullet path further evidenced by the internal exam that you conducted?
Yes.
And then, with respect to that internal exam, did you follow that same protocol, that same procedure that you described earlier?
Yes.
And did that include examining the inside of the body and the organs as well?
Yes.
And conducting that part of the exam, were you also able to determine what organs had been struck by the projectile inside Daunte Wright's body?
Yes.
And then did you ultimately recover a projectile as well?
I did, yes.
And where was that projectile recovered from, approximately?
Yes, so that projectile was recovered from the skin, or below the skin on the right side of the chest wall near the fourth intercostal muscle, and that's between the level of the fourth and fifth ribs approximately.
If we could put Exhibit 141 on the screen, please. Could you describe what's shown there, please?
Yes, so this is